Hello, good afternoon. Sorry we're starting a little bit late today. It's been a pretty busy day here. I'm Lisa Kirsch Satawa. I am an attorney at Kirsch Daskas Law Group, and we take a different approach for different learners. We have been doing a continuing series on different aspects of the IEP process, as well as how parents can get ready. And one of the biggest concerns that I have and that I'm seeing almost every day in my practice is that parents don't have accurate baseline data for where their children are now as opposed to where they were before the stay-at-home order in early March. So how are we going to do our IEPs properly for the next school year if we don't have baseline data? So what I wanted to talk about today was basically about measuring progress. We talked about measurable goals yesterday. If any of you missed that, feel free to tune in and watch that. But really, the measurable goals and the progress towards those goals are probably the most significant and important part of any IEP. And the reason for that is because the reason that those goals exist and the reason that we have progress is to be able to evaluate objectively if the supports, accommodations, or modifications that are in place are working, and if our children are learning in the way that they need to be taught in order to progress and succeed. And so just a place to start, there's several ways to measure progress. And when you see the goals identified in an IEP, you want to make sure that one of these ways to measure progress is indicated in the goal. It could be frequency, that something's going to happen 9 out of 10 times or trials. It could be duration, such as 20 minutes, 40 minutes, 2 minutes. It could be distance, 20 feet, a mile, 50 feet, whatever. Or it could be accuracy, in that 90% accuracy, 70% accuracy. And the issue that I often have with percentages of accuracy is uniformity. And when we say that 90% or that 70% accuracy, are we always using the same source or resource in order to do that assessment and determine if the goals are being met and if they're being measured accurately? If goals are written properly and the measurement is defined in a way that will assist everyone in understanding where the child is right now in their learning, then really anyone should be able to notice and evaluate that progress for the child in regards to that goal. Goals are usually written for 364 days for a school, for a year, and then there are sort of quarterly breaks as to when progress should be measured and different steps that the child should make to show that they're moving towards the end goal. And we see in some cases the child is assessed on a weekly basis to determine progress. Sometimes it's every 2 weeks, sometimes it's once a month. It just depends what the goal is and how it's defined in the IEP. The other thing to keep in mind is that every one of the goals should have the IEP team should define a period of time for a skill or behavior to be measured. So if it's going to be measured, over a 4-week period of time, it may even have to be more specific than that, and that it's going to always be measured in the morning each time every 4 weeks, or it's going to be after lunch or before lunch, or it's not the best way to measure, if, it's measured every 4 weeks, but sometimes it's on a Monday, sometimes it's on a Wednesday, sometimes it's in the morning, sometimes it's in the afternoon. As we all know, especially kids with attention issues or fidgetiness or any type of can't sit still in their diagnosis, those children tend to be much more attentive first thing in the morning than they are at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Or they're much more attentive after recess than before. So that should also be defined in the IEP if the IEP team agrees. That's not required, but I think it's helpful. It also should indicate, as I said, the occasion. And it doesn't have to be first thing in the morning, last thing in the afternoon. It could be during math. It could be, it just needs to say, that it's going to be at the same time and what that time is. If, as a parent, you ever have a question about your child's progress and, let's say you don't get a progress report for a month and you want to know today because you're seeing some things that are concerning you or are very positive to you and you want to make sure that it's happening at school also. You should always just write a note to the teacher, and I always believe that you should CC it to other members of the team. As we've talked about, over and over and over again, when it comes to special ed, when it comes to anything having to do with the curriculum and services, accommodation supports, modifications, if it's not in writing, it never happened. We can't ever force them to do something just because they said they would do it. It has to be in writing. So, and one of the things that has made a difference when I've had to challenge these types of IEPs and these goals in court is whether or not we have an email trail back and forth where this was brought to the district's attention or to the special ed director's attention or the school's attention, and then what happened next. And it's very important that everything is in writing. So when we talk about progress monitoring, what are we talking about? Well, usually it's in the form of short tests that are used to evaluate the child's progress in a specific area. And the teacher can test as frequently as they want, but they only report the number of times that is written in the IEP. It basically tells the teacher what the child is learning and what still needs to be taught. It also tells the teacher, and this is a part that I think sometimes parents don't get the memo, because if you don't ask, you're not really going to know, that if the child isn't progressing or is progressing at a slower pace than the professionals believe that they should be, then you may have to change the accommodations or modifications or supports because it's not working. And that's really, really important. The teacher should be creating progress graphs that show the progress towards the IEP goals. And parents, you can ask for those if you'd like to have a copy of them. They're not routinely given. They don't have to be given, but you certainly can ask and they should be provided. Schools can use progress monitoring in the IEP. That's allowed. It's considered a scientifically based practice, and that's fine as long as there's an evaluation of the effectiveness of the instruction. That is the critical piece. Progress monitoring can be used with one child at the same, individually and given this test, or with a whole class can take the same evaluation or mini test, whatever it is, and they can all be assessed as to where they are. The IEP team should be interpreting the data, and it needs to include information about aptitude and also about achievement. Achievement is not limited to academics. It could be functional, it could be gross motor, it could be anything that needs to be accomplished for the child to meet the end goal, which is to be an independent adult, or to go to vocational school or college, or whatever has been decided would be the best course for that child. Students with severe disabilities, their goals must be written, and it's very important that they're evaluated more frequently to make sure benchmarks are made. The purpose of special education, as you all know, is to prepare students with disabilities for further education, employment, and independent living. In that effort, we have what's called accommodations and we have modifications. Accommodations are intended to help a child work around the disability and demonstrate what he or she has learned. Accommodations don't change the actual tested material or the actual assignment in any particular way. The child just gets some help to perform in a way that they can show their learning. Remember, children with disabilities are all affected in different ways. Some, it's how they need to be taught differently. Some need to demonstrate what they have learned differently. So that's all really important. There's going to be different strategies and techniques for every student. And remember that appropriate accommodations attempt to level the playing field. And it fills the gap of what may make the child feel behind and unable to keep up. So that's accommodations. Modifications actually change the nature of the assignment. So for example, a child may, instead of getting extra time, which would be an accommodation, the child's test is shorter. The child's test is, 25 questions instead of 50. And so that's the difference. When they're put in the classroom, accommodations can be having a tutor, having a note taker. If a child can't listen and take notes at the same time, they may use the special pen, my most favorite thing ever. For those of you who haven't heard me describe it on other lives, it's a pen that the child takes notes on special paper and is actually recording the instruction. And then when the child goes back to use their notes, they can put the pen on the paper, and if they miss something or they did something wrong, they just put it right where, or if they wrote something they don't understand, they just take the pen, they put it on the special paper, it will automatically go to that part of the recording. They can listen to it again over and over to make sure that they've captured the information accurately on the paper. Great tool. Some other accommodations are permitting computer use for a child who has illegible handwriting, tape recording of class lectures, extra time to complete tests, taking tests in a quiet area. Some modifications that are common that we see in the classroom are providing shorter modified assignments or easier assignments, making the assignment completion time like they might have 2 days to be presented a lesson and then 2 days to do this modified or test or monitor progress instead of just one class period, which a student without the disability is having. That's a modification. If you reduce work to things that are relevant to the child, that's a modification. Omitting higher math facts or simplifying tasks. Perhaps a kindergartner in a gen ed class has to learn how to tie both shoes by the time they're done with kindergarten. It may be that as a modification for a child who has some fine motor skill delay, that they only need to tie one shoe, and only need to do it in that direction. There may also be a reduction in the number of concepts taught, and they may get totally different tests than the general education children. The idea behind all of this is for children to be included, and there to be an inclusion plan where children with disabilities and either supports, modifications, or accommodations can spend as much time of their day and absorb as much of the curriculum as possible in a general ed classroom. Basically, the purpose of the accommodations is for the child to overcome their obstacle. So that it's caused by the disability, obviously. So it's really important when you go to the IEP meeting to prepare, as I mentioned earlier, and we'll have many more talks about preparing for an IEP meeting. But one of the things that we talked about is that before you go in that room, you need to be able to identify your child's strengths and weaknesses and struggles. And weaknesses and struggles are not necessarily the same thing. A child can be weak in math, but they struggle with their multiplication tables. So that's the difference. Because of this notion of leveling the playing field and accommodations to fill the gap to overcome the obstacles, that's why a regular or a general education teacher needs to be part of the IEP team, because their job is to be familiar with and be able to incorporate their knowledge about the general education curriculum. So that is very important. As far as tests go, there's again accommodations and modifications, and they're different. So again, accommodations on tests provide children with a chance to demonstrate what they know. And if a child does not receive the appropriate accommodations on a test, then the test would measure basically the effect of their disability, not what they know. So it's very important that every IEP deals with testing, whether it be standardized tests given by the district or by the state, or national tests, or it is a classroom test or assessment. Common test accommodations are quiet place, extended time, or a different test format. For example, some students need their tests to be read out loud, and they respond orally out loud instead of in writing. Some respond on a computer, some respond in handwriting. It really just depends. It really just depends on the child and how the disability affects them. Remember, when we talked about we talked about the 13 enumerated disabilities in the IDEA last week. We also talked about the disabilities that can fall either under 504 or under the IDEA, and how difficult it is for the team to understand and to put in place the best accommodations to help the child. It's really trial and error, and those three biggies are ADD, ADHD, and anxiety. And anyone who ever said that, a child with anxiety just needs to calm down and count to 10 has never watched a child with anxiety take a test. And it is so underrated and misunderstood to most people, and we cannot ignore it. And those parents need to be super, super prepared for the IEP meeting, because they need to be able to explain to these educators that, yes, the DSM-5 defines it as this, and this as the diagnostic criteria, but that's not telling me how this, and this are going to interplay in a classroom, in a learning environment. And that's why it's so important. So for those reasons, it's really important to understand how to measure progress for your child for their goals, and what the difference is between an accommodation and a modification, and also to make sure that there's testing provisions as well as standardized test provisions and assessments, frequency, as well as content, and really be prepared before you go into that IEP meeting. So we're going to continue our discussion about IEPs tomorrow, and I think we'll be back at our regular time at 1 o'clock tomorrow. And tomorrow we're going to talk about special factors in IEPs when you have a deaf or hard of hearing or hearing impaired child, a child with communication problems, blind or visually impaired, limited English, or a child with behavior problems. And we'll talk about some of those things when they are present in the IEP arena. So with that, I hope that you all have a wonderful, wonderful day. It's beautiful outside, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Thanks.